want to turn our attention right now to the state of the level of threats against the president and against other public figures and government institutions here in the United States. Yesterday, the head of the Secret Service, the director of the Secret Service, he made headlines when he was asked by a reporter about the threat level with the idea of trying to get some response about the redo of the White House correspondent dinner, which is happening this Friday at a different hotel. If you remember that there was an attempt on the president and other officials there that was thwarted, thank God. And at the first go round, a number of weeks or months even, I think, ago. And so the director said, I took some notes on it because of what he was saying. He said that there were 10,000 threats related to the president, to the public officials so far this year against top high-level politicians. That's video you're looking at from the White House Correspondents' Dinner as officials were ushered out there by the Secret Service, that these threats are up 40% this year. And those numbers just seem very staggering. So we asked former Secret Service agent Tim Miller. He is the president of Lionheart Protection Strategies. Now he's really a protection expert for high-value individuals, high net worth individuals, high-profile individuals as well. But Tim, thank you so much for joining us and being willing to share your expertise with us on this. First of all, when you heard that the director of the Secret Service, I can't even remember seeing a press video of him making those kind of statements with those kind of numbers. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, first off, kudos to Director Curran and Deputy Director Quinn, because I think the information he shared is very real. And I think the Secret Service traditionally has pulled back and not shared some of that with the public. But it's important to remember the burden that Director Curran is carrying. I think he's doing a fantastic job at addressing major overhaul issues within the Secret Service. And remember, he inherited a Secret Service that hadn't, advanced technology and protective service missions had not been the focus as much. And now they're fully engaging all of that and coming back around. Why? To your point, he stated that threats are up 40% from last year. Now, that's as an agent a long while ago, that's just shocking because remember, the bread and butter of the Secret Service is protective intelligence, is getting out in front of this stuff. Now, imagine 40,000. That requires an agent or an analyst to investigate because they don't just say, oh, that one's probably nothing. They have to run those to ground. And that's just the known threats. They're still dealing with the unknown threats. Now you've got Iran and other state actors saying, we're going to attack you. So kudos to Director Curran. He's carrying a heavy load in trying to transform this agency into the modern warfare.
No, Tim, and I'm glad you brought up that point because the agency was definitely in flux. There definitely had what some former agents had said diverted from their initial core mission and core standards and core training and a lot of the practical knowledge that was passed on from one agent to the next and from the supervisors to the new agents. But that kind of an increase, why do you think that increase is so high? I mean, up 40% in 1 year. And then, just the volume, 10,000 threats in the past year. What do you think is contributing in our society to that now?
Well, I think there are external and internal. Obviously, we're at war, so the threats are going to increase by state actors, by people that are aligned with them, but then also internal threats. Lisa, we've never lived in a more divided country politically than we are living in now in the current state of the United States. It's acceptable for folks to threaten violence. And it's unfortunately, we've seen it play out where there has been attempted violence based on all of the rhetoric on the internet, and you have folks aligning themselves against law enforcement, against the Secret Service. And let me be clear, Anybody that doesn't want our leaders protected is not for our constitutional form of government. Because right now it's a Republican, but we all recognize in the Secret Service it could be a Democrat the next time. And the whole design is that's an apolitical process because we love our country and we want the people to be able to elect voters or people into office and keep them safe to do what they elected them to do. So I think that rhetoric, that division, unfortunately, we do see it play out in violent situations on the streets more and more. And to your point, I've never seen that in my career, but I never thought I would hear the director come right out and say it. Hey, we're dealing with threats unlike anything I've seen in 24 years. So kudos to him. I think the American people want to know the struggle. Now the key is, will Congress provide the resources that they've needed for decades? Let me tell you, we were short agents when I was doing it many years ago. And so the resources required are massive now. The mission has changed. And you heard Deputy Director Quinn talk about drones. That's a whole new world. But let me tell you, it's not a whole new world playing out on the battlefield. That's the weapon of choice right now. So the Secret Service is saying if it's there, it's here. And kudos to them. I think they're trying to do everything they can do to get ahead of it. But they're going to have to make some major changes and enhancements along the journey.
And Tim, there were a couple of other things that really struck me about Director Curran's comments. He said that they had this, again, all within the past year, 10 times the number of mental health committals than they've had previously. So what does that mean when they say committals?
Well, that means that there's a diagnosed condition, either by a crisis intervention team or a trained person to say this person is a threat to themselves or others. So it's interesting because there's a corresponding rise of mental health issues in the nation. As a matter of fact, the National Alliance for Mental Illness says that about 1 in 4 Americans now are struggling with mental health issues, which are both diagnosable and being treated with medication. The good news is not many of them rise to the level of violence, very few. But unfortunately, public figures like the president, like the White House, it is an attraction for people that are struggling, many of which just want to make a difference by doing something like we saw the attempted attack at Mar-a-Lago with the gas can and that young man. And it's troubling that people are being converted to violence ideologically online and then moving into an attack phase. And that should concern us all.
No, absolutely. And then also too, the attacks on excuse me, threats to government institutions as well. We saw earlier this week here in New York City outside 26 Federal Plaza, which, as you know, is the home to many federal agencies, including the FBI, including Homeland Security, Border Protection. The immigration hearings are being held there. There was an individual arrested, an Army vet, who had spent the night on the street with some, these homemade explosive devices, with a machete, with several knives, with a hammer, with these other substances that created a very smoky, a fire and very smoky condition very close to the federal building there, which of course you don't know if that's an explosive or what exactly that is, but it turns out he had mental health issues as well. So this mental health crisis seems to be a component of these, this increasing threat environment. Is that accurate, do you think?
Boy, that's 100% accurate, Lisa. My heart breaks for veterans. I'm a retired Marine Corps Reserve Lieutenant Colonel, and veterans have gone through difficult times. And to your point, when they're struggling with mental health issues, and then they're infuriated and enraged by things they're reading, and now all of a sudden that mental health issue is becoming violent, that's a big problem. And, we don't have to reflect too long ago to realize the event that was stopped on the South grounds with the UFC event. And a family member identified it and fortunately was able to stop it. And I would encourage all your listeners, if someone's struggling with mental health and they begin to speak things towards violence, get them help. Don't just assume it's going to be okay, because it's much better to help them on the front end than to have these horrible events happen and family members and or others go, well, we should have called someone.
No, exactly. And then just the trauma for the family members, and
Mhm.
there's a tendency sometimes people go, well, he's talking crazy and that's what he does. And but if it's escalating, like you said, a lot of the mental health professionals we've interviewed say that same thing. But in terms of the Secret Service, you're talking about they need more staffing, that's been an ongoing problem. Do they have the technology like some of the other federal agencies have, or have adapted, in order to mitigate any threats against the president and other high level protectees?
Well, I will say what Director Quinn said. I thought he said it very eloquently. There are certain things you go into and certain things you don't, but they are pursuing the best technology. And that's a big takeaway from 2 years ago, from an agent that, wasn't really sure how to fly a drone to now they have an active anti-drone program. And there are a lot of, challenges along that journey. What's the right technology and how do you utilize it? But to your point, the Secret Service is now leading efforts across even DoD to get the latest, greatest technology. And let me just say this: with AI changing and quantum, technology is exploding. And if anybody should have the latest and greatest, it's the Secret Service. And now, listening to Deputy Director Quinn, it is a priority to pursue that as the lead agency, which is exactly where they need to be, because we all know technology is getting more lethal every week, every month. And if we're going to protect our leaders, we have to have the latest, greatest, and very best. And I think they're on that path. A couple of years ago, I couldn't have said that. But I think with confidence after hearing that news conference that they are.
That they're sailing the ship in a different in the right direction, from what you're saying.
Right.
And then Tim, just finally, the kind of person who wants to become a Secret Service agent. I mean, it's one thing, if you become a police officer, you want to help your community, but there's always going to be risk. But that's like, you have to be alert. It's not like, oh, I'm going to take my break here, I'm just going to look at my phone while I'm waiting for POTUS or whatever. What kind of individual makes the best Secret Service agent, from your experience?
Well, as you know, I was a police officer outside of DC in Fairfax County, and then a Marine, and then a Secret Service agent. One of the things that I noticed in all three of those roles was a person who's willing and passionate about protecting others. And I think, not everybody's designed to be a Secret Service agent. And to your point, Lisa, it's really important. Secret Service agents that are worked to death eventually leave because they can't continue to be worked at the levels that they are right now. I don't know the exact numbers, but I've been told somewhere between 10 and 20% they're down in terms of staffing. Director Curran is trying to address that. And the question is a great one, Lisa, that you ask: who should come into this role? I would suggest that a person that wants to be a Secret Service agent has to have a demonstrated past or history in performing under the highest levels of pressure. Because in the Secret Service, as we saw at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, it can go to from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. You have to have the ability, the training, the background to respond. And I think they are looking at their recruiting efforts. Obviously, someone with a law enforcement background has already experienced that. Somebody with a military background has already experienced that. But we really do need people that are passionate about doing the role and the job. And that's where all this rhetoric comes in that you hear about, bad mouthing the police, bad mouthing agents. Look, we all ought to be very grateful that law enforcement's out there every single day, willing to lay down their life for all of us. And Americans, if we don't support them, we're not going to like the direction our country goes.
And hopefully it's encouraging to hear from you, from your perspective about, that you feel that they're moving in the right direction. And we're going to be watching closely what happens. I'm sure there'll be some lessons learned. And this White House Correspondents' Dinner on this Friday, the redo, is going to be much different than the last time around. But Tim, thank you so much for being with us. Tim Miller, former Secret Service agent, Marine, former police officer. We thank you for your service in all areas to our country. Also president of Lionheart Protection Strategies. Tim, thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure we'll be calling on you again and to talk with you, help us understand really the landscape that we're dealing with and these intricacies of protection and how much really goes into it. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
It's an honor to join you, Lisa. Thanks for having me.